Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm just going to give a brief, did you take the clicker with you? No. I'm just going to give a very brief background on why we're here and what we're talking about. So when President Mearns came to NKU and conducted his first listening tour during the fall of 2012, he engaged almost 3,000 faculty, staff, and students in developing the current strategic plan that we're working from. And many points were made to him regarding the budget process, which mainly centered around a desire for more communication and more transparency in the process, and more participation at all levels in the process, and that we would develop an all-funds approach to budgeting so that we could align resources with the strategic goals outlined in the plan. When I arrived in January 2014, I was asked, along with Ken Klein, to chair a task force to assess our current budget process, to identify best practices around budget models in university settings, and to recommend a new budget model for NKU. And so we worked with a task force that included faculty, staff, administrators, and we recommended that NKU go to a decentralized, incentive-based budget model. And at that point, we knew that we had to have help in developing this model, and so through an RFP process, we engaged Huron Consulting Group to facilitate a steering committee through discussions and work to develop this new budget model. In here, in this space, a few months ago, we held a campus open forum. We had about 180 people come, and we discussed the initiative, and we provided some answers and overviews of different kinds of budget models and their trends in higher education. So along the spectrum of budget models, from a very centralized, non-transparent model to a totally, what one might call an RCM-style model, we landed somewhere in the middle of that spectrum to what we're describing as a decentralized, transparent, and incentive-based budget model. And this is what we've been working on for the last few months, to develop that model and then to implement it in the coming year. And so I'll turn it now over to Jaime from Huron to take you through some of the specifics of the model itself.
Thank you, Sue. So thank you for those of you who are joining us at a nice and beautiful 8 a.m. meeting, all right? We know we were we had to schedule it a little bit on an ad hoc basis, but very happy that you guys are here. Just to kind of provide an additional comment on what Sue just made. So we have been working with the steering committee. The steering committee has all of the deans as active participants. What we really have been trying to do is engaging that kind of next level of leaders to try to figure out what is it that we want to incentivize through a new budget model, right? So this isn't the first time that we're engaging faculty or the academic side of the house, if you will. They have been active members throughout these discussions. I'm seeing a few familiar faces here. Over the course of the last 3 weeks, we have also engaged all of the department chairs on campus. If you are a department chair and we have not had the opportunity to speak, it's simply because it just did not work with our scheduled time, but we are making a full forth effort to engage the campus community at a much larger scale. So with that being said, we have a couple of slides that talk about context. So bear with me if you have already heard this. Otherwise, we want to make sure that we're laying the foundation so that everyone is receiving the same message. So first, it's an exciting time to be at NKU. Your 50th year anniversary is right around the corner. In that, there's a lot of great things that have occurring. Faculty and staff headcount is up. You're over 1,500 now. Student enrollment is over 15,000. The amount of degree offerings has expanded pretty tremendously from where you were a couple years ago. And in addition to that, your campus footprint, or the actual landscape and buildings on campus has been a huge difference, right? You can tell just by walking outside on campus how much different it is. Having that in mind, we also have to just make sure that we're being cognizant of the reality of things, right? So there's both internal and external factors that are placing pressures on our university. One, starting off with increased tuition revenue dependency, right? So hopefully we're all aware that the state funding across the entire United States is going down, right? So as that happens, institutions are having to look at alternatives to replenish that revenue source. In addition to that, we have also been seeing enrollment declines at NKU, so that obviously does not help our existing situation. The other item, it was mentioned, right, so you now have a Fuel the Flame strategic plan. In it, you have specific line items that you've outlined saying this is what we hope to accomplish over the next 5 years. A real item at hand, or a real challenge is trying to figure out, okay, well, if we want to do that, how do we actually create the resources so that we can operationalize that plan? Lastly, and this is very much true in the state of Kentucky, there's increased pressures on outcomes and value, right? So this is becoming more and more of a trend where states are now formally having a lot more discussions, trying to engage and connect. How do we allocate out our resources from the state level down to individual institutions? And a lot of that is going to be, the discussions are surrounding outcomes. Right. So why specifically a new budget model? Why aren't we looking at other things? So it's not just a siloed exercise that we're trying to do, but one of the things that we can do is leverage how we allocate out resources to really change the behavior on campus. So this, if you're taking a close look, I'm not going to walk through each of these individual bullets, but it's really trying to paint the picture of where are we today and where is it that we want to move. So on the where are we today, we are currently in an incremental based budget model, which means it's a base plus process, if you will. Incentive or incremental based budget models work very well for institutions, particularly when there's periods of enrollment growth, when we want the process to be simple and quick, when we want to be able to manage things from a centralized perspective. Great budget model to have, right? However, as I mentioned, there's several things that play now from both an internal and external perspective that are now saying that model no longer works well for NKU. We need something that's going to be more flexible, that's going to have more individuals involved, and it's going to be more transparent so that we have more people focused on the critical aspects so that we can all move together in the right direction. And that's what we're really trying to transition towards, where I know to continue saying that the model you had before has worked well, but we are trying to move into something that's going to move with the university as you continue to evolve and grow. Okay. So as we go through this process, very important to note, the task force that made the original recommendation to move to a decentralized based budget model also created guiding principles, right? So before we had a steering committee, they said, as we begin to have those conversations and actually defining and figuring out how it is that we want to allocate our resources, we need to make sure that we have principles that we're going to abide by. So the table right here lists out the 6 different principles. But I'm actually going to direct your attention to the lead introductory line. Far and large, regardless of what model we ended up with, the task force and the steering committee both agreed that promoting student success is going to be at the forefront of that. That's very important, particularly as we transition. We're talking about a budget model, so money's involved. We often will be hearing the critiques that, well, are we replacing quality or paying attention to our students in lieu of generating financial resources? We're trying to say no, right? Regardless of what we do, if we receive and are able to generate more revenue, that's great, that's excellent, that's going to help us reinvest in ourselves. But at the forefront, we have to make sure that we're promoting student success, regardless of what we're doing, in lieu of not just looking at things from a revenue generating perspective. In addition to that, a couple of different items were highlighted: stimulating strategic growth, encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship, supporting transdisciplinarity, and institutional excellence. And so with these guiding principles, if you all actually gauge and poll your deans, they will be able to attest that we do go back to these pretty frequently. There are often a lot of decision points where we're facing option A versus option B, and we'll say, well, what is it that we originally started with? And a lot of things will pop up. One thing that I do want to note with regards to the principles, this aspect of simplicity is very, very important. What we are not trying to do and what we did not do is create a market-driven economic model, meaning that we're not just ticking and tying, here's the amount of credit hours, here's how much each student paid for, and thus here's the amount of resources we're giving back to each college. We're saying, that's not what we're trying to do. We're really trying to create incentives. So what is it that we are trying to encourage? Things like making sure that we're actively engaging our students, making sure that we're properly advising them so they progress all the way through to the end of their university experience and they graduate with a degree.
Okay.
So on that note, transitioning into the actual model itself, please don't squint. It's not intended for this to be sharp or clear. What we did want to do here, though, is provide essentially a high-level screenshot of what the model looks like from a foundational structure, right? So you'll notice we're going to walk through 5 different components. Again, this is intended just to say that eventually, when we do share the model with everyone, this is what it will look like. But there's 5 main pieces. The first part is going to be, how do we organize our units? So I'm starting from the top piece, counterclockwise. The second part is, how do we treat revenues? There's an aspect of having direct revenues as well as allocated revenues. The third piece is direct expenses. The fourth piece is allocated central costs. In other words, how do we support the university's infrastructure? And then the 5th piece, which just because it's the last doesn't mean it's not important, it's probably the most important, creating a central revenues fund which allows the university to be one rather than 6 individual colleges operating independently and on their own. So as we dive in, so the model we're building is based off fiscal year 2014. So we're basing it on a year of actual data rather than budgeted figures. Why we do that is we're trying to mitigate the aspect of validating whether a budget was accurate or not. Instead, we're just saying, this is what actually happened, so let's use those figures. So as we go through that, we've organized units in one of 3 categories. What you have on this page, and if I've seen you before, this has changed a little bit, so an ever-evolving process of continuing that dialogue. So hopefully it's no surprise that on the left-hand side we have our 6 colleges. So this is a primal focus area. If your unit is listed on this page, what this means is that we're going to be providing a lot of transparency, and we do that by having a shared income statement. So you're going to be able to see, here are the revenues that this unit was able to generate, here are their direct expenses that they incurred over the year, and here's how they're supporting the university's infrastructure and supporting all of the other colleges that might need a little bit more of a support. On the right-hand side, auxiliary units. So here we have 4 listed: bookstore, dining and vending, parking, housing. These units are currently actively managed to be break-even, so that's a very important aspect. There's an expectation, and it's currently being managed as such. In addition to that, because there are some units that do generate revenue, auxiliary units are also held accountable, so they pay an institutional recharge. So that means that they help support for HR, procurement, so that they pay a little bit more to support that administration side of the university. And in addition to that, they also have to operate, so they're funding their own deferred maintenance, right? So I'll pick on parking for a little bit, right? So parking has to make sure that they're setting their parking rates high enough so that they're saving up money year after year, so when they have a multi-year need to replace or fix the foundation of a parking structure, that they don't go back to the university and say, oh, we need $5-6 million because we need it. Our building is starting, or our parking lot is starting to crumble. They need to make sure that they're actively putting those dollars aside, so when that expense does come in, they're paying for it directly. Now, you'll notice that there's a lot of units that are not listed on here, so those are what we reference as administrative and support units, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a few pages. So on to revenues and expenses. So the model that we are looking at is an all funds model. So a very important thing there. All funds means that we include everything. So it's restricted dollars, unrestricted dollars. Very important note, though, that it even warranted that underline. It is all funds transparent, right? So what we're trying to get at is that transparency aspect of it, which is what is it that we're all doing, right? We're including restricted dollars because if your college is a powerhouse in doing grants and contracts research, we want to be able to know that. We need to understand what are the activities that we're investing our time in. What it does not imply is that we're taking all dollars, pulling them into one centralized pot and redistributing them. All right, so there are certain dollars, like anything that's restricted. If those dollars get awarded to your college, they continue to be in your college. We're not repulling them, we're not reallocating them. And that's what this table on the left is intending to do. So on the revenue side, there are dollars that are going to continue to go directly to the colleges. That includes student fees, your grants and contracts, your sales and services, and then those very non-descriptive other operating and non-operating revenues. All right. In terms of the dollars that we are allocating, we have a couple. We will be talking about those in a little bit, but that's going to include our tuition, our online fees, appropriations, and indirect cost recovery. Okay. On the expense side, you'll notice again we have that same thing. We have direct and allocated expenses. With regards to direct dollars, these are simply the expenses that your college generated. So if you think about the largest ones, it's going to be our personnel expenses, so salaries, wages, fringe benefits. On the aspect of allocated costs, we have administrative and support unit net expenses. So as we go through this process, you'll notice that this really doesn't align perfectly with this, right? So we're having colleges they're being held accountable to pay for their own direct expenses, and on top of that, with the model that's being proposed, we're also asking colleges to contribute to support the university's infrastructure. So things like HR, procurement, the provost's office, president's office, and the like. And one thing I know some of you are taking notes, so this is going to be posted on our initiative webpage, so I'll make sure to go all the way to the front to share that again, so you can feel free to download a copy afterwards. So tuition allocation, so far and large, the largest dollar amount that has been discussed is related to tuition. As it stands today, we have two different activities going on. And they're related to what tuition dollar we're referencing. So if we focus in on the left-hand side a little bit, you'll notice that we have undergraduate tuition at $110 million, right? So here is where we actually are proposing to pull dollars together so that we can reallocate them across our colleges. You'll notice that there's two little sidebars right next to that undergraduate tuition. School-based scholars, which is that program where you teach high school students, they pay, I believe, 25% of the going undergraduate rate. The steering committee has said we want to continue to do that. We do not want to create a disincentive for that activity. So what they've recommended is that we put the dollars into the general pot, and when they get divided up, colleges are actually going to receive the same dollar amount per credit hour as they would from a regular undergraduate student, right? So it's saying we don't care how much a student paid for, we value that student, so we're going to provide the same level of resources back. Undergraduate online tuition was also included in here, so again, we're really trying to treat all credit hours the same, and that's where we end up going down to this gray section, so the incentive split. So getting to the end of the story, right? So where are we? So oftentimes you're going to hear splits or percentages. Right now we're sitting at a 70-30. What that percent means or what that number means is that we're trying to balance two things at hand. The first part is going to be acknowledging that there's instruction-related costs, right? So if I'm a student and I'm taking a class, someone's teaching me, and that individual has a salary that we have to cover. So we're allocating out 70% of the resources to that unit. And then the balance of 30% actually goes to support academic support, right? So really there's a big incentive there where we're trying to say we want to and need to encourage our faculty to have a more active role in making sure that students are becoming part of the college, that they're embracing where they're located. If they need additional support with their academic curriculum, that we're providing that advice. And that's where that balance is, that 70-30. Now, to give a little bit of context in terms of how did we get there, right? So we really try to take a data-driven approach to everything. This is the 4-month fast forward aspect of it, but before this, we actually took a look at where has NKU historically spent your money, right? And so over the course of 5 years, you've actually invested about 78% of your resources on instruction and 22% on academic support. So if you think about that comparison, we really are shifting a few resources out of the instruction pool and into the academic support services. And that's because we really want to create an incentive to retain and recruit our students. Okay. All right. On to the graduate side of the university. So smaller fraction, so $23 million. Very unique situation. This one has evolved a little bit. So where we are now is that we wanted to create a very similar incentive at the graduate level, but you'll notice that there's essentially 2 different pools. Right. The $9.5 million circle is the allocable piece, right? So the steering committee, the deans wanted to make sure that they wanted to acknowledge that there are some graduate programs where students do pay an additional premium. And so what we have done is we've taken the premium, or essentially that tuition differential, and that tuition differential goes directly to the college where the student is enrolled. And it's the base amount, the amount that every graduate student essentially pays at an equal level, that gets funneled through the incentive program, which is, again, 70% going to the college that's providing the instruction, 30% to where the student is enrolled. Now, I want to quickly provide a concrete example there, right? So if I'm if I'm a student in the College of Arts, so that is where I'm majoring, and I decide to take an accounting course, the College of Business is the one that's going to retain 70% of my tuition. They're the ones that taught me accounting, but the College of Arts and Sciences is going to keep 30% because that's where I'm enrolled. Now, if instead of taking an accounting class, I decided to take a arts class, so within the same college, now faculty where I'm majoring and are teaching me, you would retain 100%. Right? So what we're trying to do is really make sure that we're promoting that transdisciplinarity aspect, and rather than doing it via an infinite amount of revenue sharing agreements or kind of transfers in the back end, we're really trying to do it straightforward using a formulaic approach. Okay. The only other... Sorry. Sure. And that's where I was going to go.
I also have with respect to the undergraduate, too.
Sure. Do you want to ask the undergraduate one?
The online has been incentive-based, where the money would come back to the department, and it's being switched here. And I'm curious if anyone's thought the reasoning behind that, because my fear is it's, in a sense, de-incentivizing having online classes, because you're not going to get it. It's going to go into the total pool for undergraduates, but it's not going to specifically go back to who's ever doing the online teaching.
Well, it shouldn't be a
Right, so currently the incentive is for the online fee, so that
Yes.
additional amount.
Yeah.
And that additional amount will go to the department. This is just the tuition portion, which currently you're not getting.
Okay. So the additional fee for undergrad will go back to the home department.
Yeah, so that's in a different,
Okay.
it's a little confusing.
Yeah, because the online fee is then separated out here.
So there's 3 different pieces when we're talking about the world of online. So there's undergraduate online tuition, which has been pulled into this $110 million piece. Then there's the online graduate portion, $2.8 million. And one thing that we did not include in here, there's essentially a 3rd piece, which is the online fee. Right, so it's not online tuition, so there's 3 different pieces. The online fee is being proposed to go back directly to where a student is enrolled, so same as it is today. Yep. Now, on the question, and this is where I was going to, so what's happening on the graduate level, right? So as of today, where the current proposal that stands is to allocate those resources back out to where a student is enrolled. However, we have a pretty good conversation coming up, 3 hours with your deans, where we're going to be revisiting that, right? So we're really taking the comments that we heard as part of our department chair discussions, and one of the questions there was, well, why isn't this following that 70-30 incentive? Why has it been carved out separately? And we'll be revisiting if that's the way that we want to keep it, or if we want to go ahead and change it so it's a 70-30 split. Right, so I want to again continue to say that we're taking the feedback that people are providing and asking those questions so that we get to a better NKU model. Sure.
Just to clarify on the 70-30 split, your arts example. So if a student is in the college arts and sciences, takes a class in the college arts and sciences, they get 100% of that, but is it in any way still bifurcated to 70% of that goes to construction, sort of earmarked for that, or goes to the college?
Great question. So this is how we're allocating out the resources. So two quick notes there. So we're really driving it from university level down to the college level. Once it's at the college level, we don't dictate how that gets invested, right? So within your college, you might say, you know what, we might have a very bad retention problem, and you know what, maybe we do want to silo it and put more resources on the academic support. Or you might have very minimal retention problems, and you say, yeah, you know what, we need to reinvest more in our instruction. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to hire a new individual to help us with class loads. Sure.
So I mean, the school-based scholars, where does their academic support go?
So great question. So school-based scholars aren't students at NKU, right? So where does their portion of the academic support side go? So the dollars just go into the general bucket, so that it goes into these little pools at the bottom. But their credit hours are ineligible. So what ends up happening is the dollars that they did pay end up getting distributed across all credit hours that do count, right? So all credit hours that actually have a student majoring within a college. So essentially, if I paid $100 of tuition, right, and that $100 was split 70-30, right, so that's the incentive plan, right? The 30% share, because I'm not enrolled within a college, nobody gets that money from a direct college. But now, if you were also a student and you were enrolled in the College of Arts and Sciences, the credit hours, the per credit hour basis on the academic support side is now going to be weighted a little bit heavier because there's more money available and less credit hours that it's being divided across. So essentially it acts as elevating the average cost per credit hour for those credit hours that are being counted.
Just give a little more clarification of what kind of expenses are included within this umbrella that's being called academic support?
So in terms of expenses, right now it's not directly tied to any expenses because we've changed over from that data starting point that says here's where you've invested your money to here's where we want to be as an institution. So academic support can include, it's university-wide where we started, and it's advising, career center, any of those functions, and it's both from an administrative perspective as well as what you have within your respective colleges. So that's where that starting point came from. But how it evolves and how we got to the 70-30 is more of a discussion base, which is where is it that we want to go? And the steering committee wanted to make sure that we had a stronger incentive for academic support. So that's why that shift went from what was formerly 22%, which was this is how much we have spent in the past, to 30%.
So that comes entirely out of the instruction. So if the total gross revenues of the university stay the same, in fact, we will be getting 8% less.
You can't deduct that because you've never actually ticked and tied that one tuition dollar pays for $1 of faculty salaries, right? So we can't make that assumption that this dollar was always spent on this in the past. If anything, we're saying that now we're actually trying to align and say, here are the things that we're trying to incentivize, and here's how we're going to allocate out the resources to the college level. But as the previous question was asked, how you actually spend it within the college is up to your respective college units, right? So we're not saying that you are only able to spend 70% to support instruction or faculty salaries. We're saying, here's how we're going to allocate it out to you as a college. How you allocate it down to the departments is a separate conversation that is not being discussed within our steering committee. Now, as that, I will add, kind of from our perspective, we usually encourage deans to not either adopt the rules directly in terms of allocating it from college to department level. We usually encourage about a 1 to 2 year, essentially, time so that deans and department chairs and everyone within the units understands the model, understands that there are financial implications whenever we change specific activities, and then engage department chairs and faculty to figure out how is it that we want to reallocate out resources within our respective colleges.
I saw it last time, the 70% went to the college that was teaching it, and the 30% went to the major. That's still what that means?
Yes.
So it's just a different type. So it's up to the college how they divide it from their pool that they get, right?
Yes, correct.
I'm just curious about the technology that goes along with online teaching. So the educational technology, all the sites, is not included in academic support?
So
So just kind of how does that fit in?
okay. We're gonna, so one other important thing though here is that the conversation we've been having is based on gross tuition, so it doesn't yet acknowledge the point that we are a public institution, that we want to attract top performing students. So at the end of the day, one of the other things that we do, it's, hopefully you all can see it, is we also allocate out allocate out aid. So student aid actually gets distributed across all the colleges based on how much undergraduate tuition they received. All right, so concrete example there, if the College of Informatics had or received 25% of total tuition, they would be asked to contribute to 25% of the institutional aid that was awarded.
They would also be getting the dollars that we currently
Yep.
What about courses that are taught out of units that aren't in the college?
So that's a heftier one. So two things that are happening there. The first one is very similar to the question about school-based scholars. So if there really isn't a college-based faculty member, or that the individual doesn't have a faculty assignment within a college, those credit hours are excluded, but the dollars are still retained in these general pots. So in other words, the money that they actually did pay helps to increase the average price of all the other credit hours. The other part of it is that this is one of the things that we're trying to encourage is actual alignment of students into a specific program. As we go through this process, so one of the unique things that's going to happen is that your data quality is going to improve over the next couple of years, right? So there's going to be a lot more pressure, a lot more attention being put on, did my faculty member actually receive credit for teaching that class? Right? If I have a research agreement where there's 2 principal investigators, did we actually set it up so that the indirect cost recovery is being split equally? Right? So a lot of times these are things that happen a little bit under the radar. You know, we give it a quick glance and then we just say, okay, let's move forward. But now we're actually ticking and tying things, so it's going to take a little bit of time to clean up our data, right? So making sure that if a faculty member actually is assigned to a college, that your college is receiving the credit for it. And the other aspect is going to be, it's going to eventually allow you to have better data or better analytics that leverage those pieces of information, right? So as the data quality improves, the analysis that you do on as moving forward is going to improve as well. Okay. So if it's okay, there's a lot more content. All right, so appropriations. So during this fiscal year, there was $45 million. So really there's 3 things that we're trying to focus in on. Far and large, the biggest pieces relate to the gold standards. These are identified as credit hours successfully completed, which the current proposal right now provides 70% of resources there. The next largest piece is another gold standard, it's degree completion. The proposal says we want to carve out 25% of our appropriations and allocate those pieces out to colleges. And then the smaller portion of it is related to sponsored activity, so 5% of it. That 5% came from a Huron recommendation where we actually took a look at how much are you actually generating in indirect cost recovery, right? So if you are a researcher in this room, I think this will be, I think you know that every time we do research on campus, we lose money. That's just a fact that happens at every single university. So what we're trying to do by creating this incentive is saying we don't want faculty to be discouraged from doing that activity because you're losing money. So what we do is we carve out these resources to essentially help to top off the indirect cost recovery that you're not generating, right? So in a sense, we're trying to make it an even level playing field so that you can continue to do that. The other thing is that when in terms of allocation purposes, we do it based on grant and contract activity, or so how many revenues you actually generated. We don't actually look at how much indirect did you actually receive, right? So we're trying to separate those two pieces so that everyone has fair access to those dollars. I think that's very important, particularly for researchers that don't receive their grants from the federal government. So if it's more of a local, or I know education, right? There's a lot of grants that you're just simply not allowed to charge indirects. So we're trying to create that little incentive. On top of that, this little note right here, in addition to this state appropriation incentive, we're also changing the way that we have historically provided the indirect cost recovery back to colleges. So right now, the existing revenue sharing agreement says that colleges receive 50%. Then a quarter of it goes to support the sponsor programs office, and then a quarter of it goes to the general fund. This new model says we're ripping that agreement up, and 100% is going to go to the college that generated it. Okay, so it's a bit of a transition. One thing that's very important that I want to note here is that here we have 3 focal areas. We want to stress the point that these are not the only 3 pieces that matter at the university, right? So public service is a very, very important component. It's just that in terms of allocating things from a formulaic perspective, we can't do that for public service. We do not want to create a value saying that one piece of public outreach is worth more than another, and there just isn't a consistent way of logging or tracking that type of activity. So that involves more qualitative-based discussions, and so we're wanting to acknowledge that within this aspect of the model. Now, I think this is where we're going to get to that question. So up to this point, we've talked about we have a pool of money, tuition, appropriations, and we're putting those dollars back out to the colleges. So we're really trying to empower them by putting direct dollars into your units. So how do we actually pay for other costs that are at the university, right? So the proposal that we have in place is asking that all of the colleges help to contribute and to support our administrative functions, and we do that using a proxy or an allocation variable. So going on academic services, right, so this includes things like enrollment management, the provost office, the honors program, international. So a lot of different components. So one of the things we're trying to do is balance the aspect of, or actually redefine what transparency means, right? We do not want to define transparency as, oh, you want the information? Here's 100 pages, right? We're really trying to balance the aspect that we want to provide you with a good report that's going to provide understanding, and then if you want additional details, that would be separated, right? So that's how we got to this organization. And so all administrative units and all support units on campus, you are either a college, an auxiliary, or you fit in one of these general pools. And so how we actually pay for them, so within academic services, you'll notice it says the allocation variable is credit hours. So again, we say, okay, for each college, how much did you teach on campus, right? So if you are the College of Law and you taught 15% of all of the credit hours on campus, we would be asking you to pay 15% of the academic services model pool. So one thing that I need to point out here is that we have reorganized the units across campus. The way the model portrays them does not indicate that we're going to have a university restructure, right? This is simply we want to organize units in terms of what are they providing to our colleges, not necessarily change the way that we're reporting internally, right? So 2 different aspects of it. The other important part is what we ask colleges to contribute towards is the net expenses, right? So I mentioned earlier that auxiliaries have an institutional recharge, right? So they help fund some of these different administrative units. Those dollars help to offset what we ask colleges to contribute towards, okay? One notable item with regards to facilities management, the square footage variable, that one had a lot of discussion in the sense that it's not simply assigned square foot to a college. The steering committee has decided to redefine that allocation variable, so it actually excludes all classrooms, it excludes classroom labs, and it also has two current adjustments. So for the College of Arts and Sciences, we have also made an adjustment for theater space. For the College of Informatics, we have made an adjustment for the Digitorium. So these are all discussions that we had as part of the steering committee saying, you know what, that is something that the university benefits as a whole. Let's go ahead and make that adjustment. And then on the question related to IT, right, or that and Ken and Sue, tell me if I'm wrong. I believe if the infrastructure is within information technology, so the expenditure would still remain there, and it's just the question now is going to be how are we going to fund that moving forward? And so for information technology, it's based on total headcount, so it takes into account your faculty, your staff, and your students, okay?
I know that you mentioned with the square footage, so with faculty that have research lab space, is that going to be included in the square footage, and does that kind of incentivize us doing research, because now we're paying for that research space?
So the research lab space is included. Now, it should not disincentivize you because we're now giving you 100% of the F&A, and two, we're also created an incentive to make sure that we are providing you with resources from the state appropriation pool to help provide additional funding, right? So it would be a disincentive if, for example, you are charging the off-campus rate, which is a lot lower, and you actually had a direct lease payment that you had to pay, and you decided not to charge it to your grant. That would be a disincentive, but that's because we're not charging the lease space that we should have been charging. And so one important thing there is that it has been a comment that has been expressed or brought up, right? So why classroom space and why not research lab space? So at one point, we also have to keep in mind that we can't make adjustments for every single thing because pretty soon the only thing we're going to have is just office space. And what's going to happen is that it's going to drive the cost per square foot super, super high, right? So we have to be very cognizant of the point of what is it that we want to adjust. We can adjust for as many or as little things that we want, but at the end of the day, that's going to have a direct impact on whatever is left. Other questions? So the fifth component, central revenues pool. So this is very, very important. This is really intended to do a couple different things. So first off, from a high level perspective, there's two main pieces of it. The first one is to make sure that we have enough available resources held back so we can fund or essentially top off colleges that can't meet their bottom line once we hit essentially the on button or flip this light switch on. The other part is actually proactively planning and to try to create financial resources so we can reinvest for strategic initiatives. So how we actually create this pool of money is through a participation rate. I really dislike the word tax, but I'm sure it's going to be said. But the participation rate is how we create those resources. That participation rate gets applied to select revenues. It's essentially all dollars that are within the colleges except for grants and contracts and your indirect cost recovery. And when we have the conversation with the steering committee, we don't really ask them, well, what % do you want, right? It's not a give me a number and then that's what we're going to model. It's more of a principle-based discussion where we say, are we all in agreement that when we turn the light switch on, we can't allow one college to have a huge windfall of resources, and on the opposite side have 2 or 3 colleges having to deal with a big budget cut, right? So acknowledgement that we all need to work together to make things better in the long run, that's pretty important. So what we do is we know in the back end, here's how much we need to hold back, and based on that number, here's what the participation rate is going to be. Now, we're still talking about the reason why you don't see an actual percent here is because that number is still something that we're discussing, right? So there's concerns with how high that number is. And so we're talking and having conversations with the steering committee to figure out how do we mitigate that? What are other opportunities for us to decrease that participation rate so that in the long run, you are able to retain more of your resources? Sure.
I don't know if you already said this, and you may be getting to it, but when the model is rolled out, it's based on a deficit year?
Yep. And so very important to note there, as Sue mentioned, the fiscal year that we're modeling, NKU operated at a deficit. So please do not be shocked when we finally share the model and your college is at a negative. Every college is at a negative. We can't artificially inject revenues into the model. Well, we can, but it's not a good thing. So one of the things we're being cognizant is making sure that people are aware that, hey, it's not the model that is giving each college a deficit. It's a symptom, right? We actually operated in a deficit, so the model is simply portraying that on a college-by-college basis. Right. So incentive-based budget models do come and they provide a lot of change, particularly when it comes to decision-making. So here on this page, wanted to quickly highlight how does this actually impact different constituents. All right, so from the president perspective, what this is going to allow is making sure that we start to clearly articulate what is it that we want to be. Right? The model is very transparent. The model promotes the aspect of clear decision making and making sure that individuals understand here's why I made this decision. So for the president, it's going to be an opportunity to say we can no longer be everything to everyone. So what is it that we want to be, and let's be great at it. From a provost and finance perspective, that's really the exercise that we're going through right now. What are the incentives that we want to create so that we can all work in the same direction? Right? We, again, don't want to have 20 different unique incentives. We want to make sure that we're focusing in on the select items. I mentioned gold standards, right? Very important. That's not just what's included in your strategic plan, but that's also what's being looked at in the state of Kentucky for a potential new funding formula in terms of how NKU might receive your resources in the future. From a dean's perspective, the ability to prioritize activities within your respective colleges, so having more of an improved understanding of here's how I receive my money, how is it that I want to then allocate it back out to at the department level. Within academic departments, an opportunity to innovate better when knowing that what you do from an individual perspective or a collective perspective does actually have an opportunity to generate additional resources for your unit. So I think it's pretty important there, specifically with this group, right? So right now we have a conversation saying if you have a teaching load right now saying, well, I need you to teach 5 more students, it's really done with one of these. It's a great job, thank you for doing that. We don't have any more money, but hey, we appreciate you doing that. This model is really trying to change that dynamic where it's saying, you know what, if we actually are able to do that, this means that this will actually mean additional resources for our college. And that's really what we're trying to do. It's sticking and tying that activities do drive either an opportunity to contain costs or an opportunity to generate additional resources. Lastly, from a service unit perspective, so think of this as administration or your service units, it's an opportunity to improve service levels. So if you think about the conversation we had 2 pages ago where we're saying colleges are now funding administrative units, we do not want any of you to leave here think with the thought that you are now going to be managing and pointing the finger and saying, we own you, we pay for your budgets. That's not, please do not leave with that in mind. What this is going to do is provide a platform where you are now going to have frank conversations about what is it that you're receiving, right? Now that colleges are going to be paying into these units, is the amount of service that you're receiving equal or commensurate with how much you're paying, right? And what I think is a very, very critical aspect of it is that administrators are now also going to have that opportunity to talk about what is it that you value, right? So I'll pick on IT, right? So if I was the head of IT and I gave you all notebooks, There's nothing preventing you from wanting something next year. You want the newest computer, I'm not charging you. If I say I can't do it for 5 years, chances are half of you would say, no, that doesn't make sense. I heard so-and-so got theirs last month, why can't I get mine? So it's very easy to demand more without having additional resources. What this is going to do is force the discussion to go in usually one of two directions. It's going to say, all right, I understand that you're not satisfied with what we're providing, or you're not satisfied with the frequency that we're replacing things. So we have two options at hand. We're either going to A, increase the funding level that my unit is going to receive so I can hire more people or replace the equipment that you're looking for, or B, we're going to have a more thorough conversation of here's everything else that I'm doing. Tell me what you don't like, or tell me what are the activities that you can let go of so that we can refocus our attention from those activities that you find not very valuable to those activities that you find very valuable, right? And so that's something very important that is really going to be a large shift in culture, where there's going to be different expectations, a lot more discussions, all in all to get the university in a better direction. So as we hit towards the end, so talking about the proposed implementation timeline, so we're still having these larger, or it's kind of these stakeholder engagement discussions through the end of next week. And we're meeting with the steering committee, like I mentioned today, 3 hours today. We're also going to be meeting with them in June to wrap up our efforts. But once we conclude the model development aspect of it, we really need to start shifting our attention to implementation, right? So what does that actually take, right? So all of these discussions, we hope that you don't feel like we're kind of just starting to engage you at the end of it. What we're really trying to do is engage you to the extent that we now have a pretty solid model framework, right? That we believe is pretty close to what the end product is going to be. As part of the next steps, it's going to be a lot of involvement. It's going to be continuing to engage the academic side of the house, engaging the administrative and auxiliary units. That's very, very important. If you think about what we're recommending, we're saying we're going to change the way that we fund those units, right? They haven't been part of this process very actively. We were meeting with the executive team. We met with division budget officers yesterday, but the extent of attention we've provided them relative to the colleges, department chairs, faculty, it's very, very different. We're going to have to think about how do we need to change our infrastructure. So the budget process itself is going to have to change, right? So now we're going to have the need to have administrative budgets in a lot sooner than our college budget. So there's going to be a timing difference. We need to understand what tools or reporting do we need, right? So what do we need to help us become better? What type of training is needed? Another thing is going to be that we're going to have to integrate additional data into the model. So again, we're focused in on fiscal year 2014, but the chances of us getting everything 100% right are, maybe they're good, but I'm not going to put my name on that. But we have to layer in an additional period of actuals information. We need to layer in an actual budget period, because after all, this is going to be a budget model. And we need to take a step back and reassess with the deans and the steering committee. Do the allocation things, the allocation rules that we originally proposed, do they still make sense? Or was there something that was a bit of a hiccup, or something that we didn't think we didn't think through when we were originally setting up the methodology? Okay, which will then lead into the parallel process. So that's this little bar right here. So what that means is that during the next fiscal year, so in 2016, colleges and all units are still going to be receiving your resources the same way you do today. So it's business as usual. But in the back end, the business office or the budget office is going to be doing a little bit more reporting to identify and provide reports to say, here's what it could have looked like if this was actually the model that we used to allocate out resources. So again, twofold thing there is we're trying to create infrastructure from a budget office perspective, right? They need time to also get up to speed, understand how they have to do their reports, get the feedback they need to enhance them and make them better, and simultaneously also allow individual colleges to understand how the methodology works, understand and realize that changes in behaviors, changes in how you do your teaching or the class loads that you're taking will drive a hopefully positive financial impact to your respective colleges. Okay? And ultimately, that'll get us to FY17, which would be the proposed first year, where the model is actually live, where the resources your college receives are actually following the proposed budget model. That's a question.
Yeah, so I didn't see anything in here about cost for D1 athletics.
Yep, so good question. So athletics is considered a support unit. So intercollegiate athletics, there will be transparency into that operation. So that's something that the steering committee felt strongly about. So there were questions before, and again, I'm saying this because half of you have seen a different slide where it was not included. The other half, this is the first time you're seeing it. Intercollegiate athletics, formerly, there were discussions on should we be treating this as a revenue unit or as an auxiliary, or should we figure out a different alternative to how to support it? So, being realistic in terms of how athletic programs work, so across the entire United States, there's only about 12 to 13 of them that actually break even. So chances of NKU's athletic program breaking even are pretty slim. I think it's safe to say that we're not going to be able to get there. And so the question that we posed with the steering committee is, one, we acknowledge the aspect that you made the request to have transparency into this operation, so we did that. But the second part now is, we need to continue to support this, right? So how are we going to do it? If athletics was treated as an auxiliary, what would happen is that the central revenue pool, so essentially this pool of resources that we created, that means we're going to have to hold back a lot more resources, right? As we hold back more resources, what's going to happen is the participation rate is going to have to go up. So that was one of the stress points. So there we had to balance it, say, okay, so given these two proposals, right, do you prefer to have the higher participation rate and being able to always see the income statement of athletics? Or B, which is the direction that we've now gone towards, which is we actually identify or are going to identify how we're going to pay for it. But in doing it in this fashion, colleges are going to pay to support athletics at a varying rate. And in addition to that, it's going to decrease the pressure on the participation rate, right? So rather than having a 25% rate, maybe we have a 20 or maybe we have a 15%. And so those are the types of conversations that we're having. And so kind of, again, if you've seen a different set of slides, that's how it's transitioned over. And a lot of it is the acknowledgement that we need to continue to provide support, and we want to do it from using a different funding mechanism rather than the pool of resources that are really intended to support colleges and strategic initiatives. And on that note, so I talked about providing transparency into athletics. So this model, the deans and whoever receives a copy, once it is shared, or if you have an active role in the budget process, there will be a line item every year that talks about intercollegiate athletics. So we're not trying to cover it or hide it. It's still going to be transparent.
So revenue generated coming from the state or tuition. What about private industry, places from the area?
Those would be
Donors, things like that.
so two different things. So private industry, those are really, if you were hired to do specific work, those are likely to be sales and services. So those are on the direct bucket. Anything else, I feel pretty comfortable saying unless it's a tuition dollar or it came from the state as an appropriation dollar, chances are you're going to get it directly. Right, so I think that's the easiest way to describe it. On the aspect of gifts, those gifts go directly into the foundation, so those dollars are not included in the model.
Where in the timeline do you figure out how money is allocated within the colleges, and are there any constraints or guidelines for checks there?
So the model describes the way that revenue flowing into the university is distributed out to the colleges. And then the model doesn't dictate how the colleges distribute that revenue internally. And so deans could use the same formulas. They could set their own formulas. They historical models, they could set aside strategic investment pools. I mean, part of the decentralization is not to dictate to, beyond the college level.
So there's no boxes around that.
The guiding principles are still the guiding principles.
Okay, and when is that going to happen? When do we decide within the colleges?
They'll be, I would think the deans would be looking at that over the course of next year because it's a shadow year, so they'll be able to play around with, sort of, if I allocated this way, I can see in the shadow budget, how it would play out, right? But again, I will say the guiding principles remain true all the way through the institution.
And if I might, just one quick add-on. So something very important, so whenever that decision does get made, one of the things that should also be part of that is transparency in terms of how it is that you're doing it, right? So I know that there's faculty concerns with regards to your department chair or dean, not to say that there is or isn't that at NKU, but one of the things that we have to continue to do is the aspect of transparency. So if a dean is going to allocate out resources in one specific way, everyone should have an understanding of how that's going to occur so that we're mitigating against those behind closed doors types of discussions, which just cause anxiety across units.
So will they have a company like you to talk to at the dean's level when they're figuring this out, or are they on their own?
Well, so they won't have Hurons because Hurons work with us is almost done. But one of the next steps is to set up a governance structure that will have several different committees, and one of them will be sort of I don't know what we'll call it, an executive steering committee that, and then they also have to make sure that the answer is in terms of making sure things remain transparent and
So you'll be
performance-based.
You'll be overlooking how each college is allocated and
Yeah.
have some approval.
Yes, especially, for example, with faculty hiring, for example, the deans will be able to do their own hiring plans rather than them having to seek approval from me or to decide the allocations. But even when they devise their own plans, they'll need my approval before they go ahead with it. Because I want to make sure that the decisions that they're making are justified in terms of where the enrollment pressures are and things like that. The other thing that I was going to say is there will be a number of decisions that won't devolve out to the colleges. For example, salary increases so you could imagine that in 1 year a particular college does make business and says, oh great, we can afford to give our faculty and staff raises, whereas nobody else maybe could do that. That is not going to happen like that. That will remain a university level decision. So that would be something the president would receive recommendations on and decide what to do about that. So it's not that the colleges will have full autonomy. There will still be some university level decisions.
I was just wondering, you said we'd start at a deficit?
Hmm?
Do we have a timeline for when we can be out of that?
So let me to paraphrase. So it's not that you started at a deficit, it's that at the end of the year you were at a deficit. So it's not that it's it's an automatic budget cut. So sometimes that happens, right? So I know a huge example of that is housing, right? So during that one fiscal year they had they did a lot of construction. We're talking $4+ million worth. It's not that they generated an additional $4 million that year, so it looks like they had a deficit, but what they were doing is they were actually leveraging their reserves to pay for those one-time expenditures, right? But because we're taking a 1-year snapshot period that does not include reserves, it looks like you were at a deficit. So kind of the timeline, obviously we want to hope that we're never in that position, right? So, or we want to try to address this as quick as possible, but another item is going to be how to carry forward resource work and how are those going to be incorporated into the model, but that has not yet been discussed.
Yes, I'm trying to reconcile what was just said about the decision-making within the college being decentralized and not dictated down. What was said earlier about the 70-30 allocation between instructional budget and academic support budget. So can you tell me how those two things work together?
Sure.
They seem opposite each other.
So the 70-30 is not a budget per se. We're just saying we're going to take into account what credit hours were produced in terms of how many credit hours your faculty taught, as well as how many credit hours students took that are enrolled within your college. The combination of both of those two pieces is going to give us an allocation dollar amount, so whatever that ultimate dollar amount is, that's what we're going to give your college. How your college decides to invest within the instruction piece or academic support piece, that is not at all part of this model. So you can actually say, we're going to invest it all in terms of compensation. We're not actually going to help support the academic support side of how we received our money. So they're exclusive, right? You receive the dollars one way, but how you actually use them within your college could be different.
The academic support budget could be entirely spent on instruction.
Yep.
So what's the point of saying that there's a 70-30?
Well, if you do that, right, so the consequence would be that if you actually do that, you're actually not going to be investing in academic support, so chances of your students, you're going to be hurting student retention. You're not going to be doing proactive recruitment of students. So something is going to give if you're not reinvesting your resources, at least somewhat aligned to this, right?
Well,
But there's nothing, but there's,
deciding 70-30, before we get into the merits of whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, because if it's totally decentralized, as you're saying, then 70-30 is a kind of meaningless number, right? Because each college
it's not meaningless from we're a university and we need to allocate out the resources across all of our 6 colleges. That's meaningful in that discussion. It's a separate conversation that should be correlated to the 70-30. It doesn't have to be because there's no limitations of what percentage you want to adopt within your respective college. So again, if your college decides to adopt the exact same thing, we have the exact same incentive from university down to college, down to department. If your college decides to invest everything on instruction and not academic support, I can almost guarantee you that in the long run, you are going to be hurting with student retention, graduation rates. And so there are implications, and there should be discussions on what is that balance for your college, right? But ultimately, it's going to be a matter of what is it that you're doing, right? So if you have highly expensive faculty, you might want to put a little bit more into the instruction bucket. If you have a serious retention problem, I would highly encourage that you put more on the academic support bucket so that you really are engaging and you're sending a clear message down to the faculty line saying that I need your support to engage students and you need to engage them early on. So we're providing them the right level of academic support so that they're successfully completing the classes, because that's going to drive resources here. It's going to drive resources here because they're going to have successfully completed credit hours. If we do a great job and they complete their degree within 4, 5, 6 years, we're also going to get money because they earn a degree. All right, so every decision has ramifications, and so we're not aligning and saying you have to do it this way, but you have to think about specific things, and how your college decides to elect and pull those resources is going to be up to the college. And usually what I have seen, so within Huron, is that kind of mini executive budget committees actually get established within colleges so that you have those types of conversations, right? So it's not just the dean making all of the decisions, but it's the dean, the business officer, associate deans, if you have them in your respective colleges, a few faculty members saying, okay, what is it that we want to do? How do we identify the same conversation where every college has a different cost of instruction? How do you balance that within the college where different departments some departments are going to be more costly than others? And ultimately, it's having to try to find that balance.
Since you said that departments need to save money for large expenditures, future expenditures, your example with parking has to have enough money to repair the Does that mean that we're going to have carry forward from one year to the next within all units, or just units that, like parking?
So, did you want to? Okay. So two things. So the first, my example really was siloed to auxiliary units. These units have to be planning that way. They are responsible and held accountable for their large expenses, right? So I talked about parking. I also mentioned housing not too long ago. At the individual college basis, that still is going to warrant additional conversations. The aspect of how are we going to handle equipment purchases has been brought up. So we've had 4 months of conversations, but there's still a lot more to go. And there's going to be different ways of managing that, right? So if it's a large piece of equipment that's going on a grant contract, the college or department should pay for that directly. It's a sponsoring agency is helping to support that. If it's more of an IT-related equipment, we have to identify, well, do we want to collectively, as a university, have everyone pitch in to support that, with the understanding that eventually every college is going to need varying degrees? So then what you would have to do is create that governance body of it, saying we need to make sure that if we're all contributing money into this bucket for equipment replacement, that we all have an equal opportunity to receive our fair share of the resources back. But there are going to be some instances where, you know what, maybe a department chair just really thinks that he or she can handle that aspect, and they're going to go out and seek private donations to get that piece of equipment. There's nothing preventing that from happening, right? So in that end, it would be the faculty member paying essentially for that piece of equipment on their own. So unfortunately, I gave you 3 answers, right? So end result, we don't know. We don't know yet. Ken?
Currently you don't have reserve accounts, and so we treat your carry forward like it's a reserve, and so we just plug in the carry forward, and that's how you build up. Your college will have a reserve of some kind, and so how you access that and get spent will be very different. Those are discussions we need to have. So the carry forward is a little different now that we'll have reserves.
I'm going to take issue with your 70-30 on your instruction. If you reduce the amount of money going to instruction, you're not going to hire good quality instructors. You're going to be limited to filling the classes. You're going to be limited to hiring adjuncts. And I don't know where the academic support 30% for that is really going to improve retention. If you have some numbers on that, that would be great.
I'll let you know, right? So
I walked in late.
the 70-30 split, again, I need to encourage everyone to take this message with you. The 70-30 split is intended to create a balance of 2 things. It's not, we don't have an infinite amount of resources, so we can't put 100% of the resources to support faculty compensation, and we can't also create an academic support incentive when there are no resources left available. What we have to understand is there is a balance, right? So if MKU right now is tuition dependent, we're receiving less money from state appropriations, and our enrollment is declining, that means we're putting a lot more pressure on those students that are actually attending NKU. Right? So at one point you're going to have to balance that, and whether or not you choose to elect or to hire an adjunct faculty member versus a tenure track faculty member, that is a college-based decision, right? There's nothing saying you have to hire the individual that has a lower salary, because that might not deliver the better quality to that student, right? So that's one of those things that I said, incentive-based models get dinged on a lot for saying you're replacing academic quality for financial outcomes, right? Whenever those things happen, it's because we're letting the ball drop. And so part of the governance aspect and things that I've had conversations with your executive leadership team is faculty have to be part, specifically those with curriculum planning responsibilities. You have to be brought into the fold of implementation. You have to be brought into the fold of the governance structure, because if those things happen, that's because something else in the system has broken, right? So we can't allow a college to just hire only adjunct faculty because it's cheaper, right? That's not good. We want to deliver high quality instruction. So that's happening. There should be a mechanism in the model or a mechanism in the governance process that says, wait a second, you can't do that. That's not what we stand for. We're losing quality. We need to, that activity has to stop. And so there's a lot of other things outside of that 70-30 split. So please don't take the 70-30 split and say that that is how you have to use your resources, or don't think of it as every dollar that goes in one bucket means that we're losing a dollar in the other. It is a balance point that we have to try to identify, and there is no perfect solution, right? It's just a matter of where is it that we want to try to go towards.
But I think the thing to keep in mind is that these are the dollars that are going directly into the colleges. And without that 30% going to the college of major, what we really are saying then is that, if we lowered that, for example, then there'd be less money to spend on advisors, less money to spend on, the mentoring of undergraduate research, or all those things that we do for our majors, even when we're not teaching them. And so that if I'm teaching my own student, I'm getting 100% of the revenue. If I'm teaching someone else's student, I'm getting 70% of the revenue. But if somebody else is teaching my student, it's not like I'm not engaging with them. There are still a lot of costs associated in your advising centers, in your faculty workload time spent advising, spent mentoring, in your help to establish co-ops and internships and all those things that benefit students that are because they are your majors, not necessarily because you are teaching them. And that's what that recognizes. Does that help? Yeah. One of the problems we have is an over-reliance on part-time faculty. The incentive-based budget model should drive resources up and towards the colleges of instruction to the extent that deans and chairs can make adjustments in those things and actually decrease that reliance on part-time.
And so on the note of, right, so we're talking about a fixed split, if you will. Part of this process, and again, the governance aspect of the conversation has to deal with how frequently are we going to re-gauge or reassess our budget model. So oftentimes institutions actually adopt a 4 to 5 year time frame. Indiana University is the kind of the poster child for this. Every 4 years they actually create a faculty-led task force, so it's all faculty members from the respective colleges, and they're given a 1 year turnaround time frame where they have to evaluate every single model decision point to make recommendations on what needs to change based on the new strategic plan, the level of potential concerns that have arisen over the last 5 years, and or anything else that might be impacting or placing pressure on the university. They have a year, they present that to the president, and then on year 5 is when they adopt those new changes, and then they fix the model again for a 4 year period so that you can continue to adopt and have the model kind of grow with the university rather than having a stagnant model that has been the culmination of 40, 50 years worth of decisions. Okay. Sure.
If I'm reading this right, this works, the ideal sense, every faculty member belongs to a college, every student belongs to a college, and a major, and then they have to sort of, and we're worried about, what about those programs that aren't in a college, like an honors program, or there's faculty across colleges, like that's what about students who haven't yet identified a major. Can you talk a little bit about some examples in those areas, what happens to the revenue generated by the student just getting out of the major? What happens to an honors program? I mean, do you artificially put them in arts and sciences by doing those faculty focus in arts and sciences?
So that's a very technical question, and so I'm going to tread lightly on that because it's pretty technical. So it really depends on multiple things, right down to what is the student's declared major, right? So students outside of the College of Education and Human Services predominantly have the opportunity to declare what their primary versus secondary major is, right? So say, for example, I was in that program and I elected not to put the honors program as my primary major. You would not receive credit for that. Now, I say technical because still a lot of discussion. So one of the things we're talking with the steering committee is how do we want to manage double major students, right? How do we want to address those aspects? Now, on the faculty side of your question, it is my understanding that faculty are assigned to a college, right? So that college would be the unit that receives credit for it, even though you're teaching an honors course. And then the actual infrastructure aspect of supporting the honors program, that is actually paid for within academic services. So colleges would be contributing based on a credit hour metric, right? So if College of Arts and Sciences taught 50% of the credit hours on campus, they would be asked to support that program at a rate of 50%. That was a lot of multi-part, technical. All right, well, unless there's other pressing questions, I do want to say thank you, and thank you for sticking around for an extra 25 minutes. But like I said, this is still the kind of early stages. We want to really start to engage the campus community to understand what the methodology is. This is not going to be the only time you're going to hear about it. Again, for those of you that stepped in a little bit later, this presentation is going to be made available. And the email address or the web page address that you can find it at is going to be newbudgetmodel.nku.edu. All right, so that will be made available for download. So you can have that, share that with individuals that were not able to join us, or at least have it as a reference. Just bear in mind that periodically check in with the web page because this continues to evolve. And so rather than having multiple repositories of old model methodologies, we want to have one. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Great. All right, thank you.